In November of 2008, I was diagnosed with a disease that has defined most of my life: type 1 diabetes, an autoimmune disorder that affects more than 9 million people across the world. As I have grown with this disease, I have seen the improvements in technology: new insulin pumps, continuous glucose monitors, and nearing an artificial pancreas. But one thing has not changed: the most important factor for diabetics: insulin, the life saving medication that has become increasingly unattainable due to high pricing. Pricing so high that diabetics have rationed the drug and, in worse cases, lost their lives. The insulin crisis has made headlines across the country within the past decade, as insulin has reached up to $100 a vial, which lasts approximately 2 weeks. The real question is, why? Insulin began to be produced in the early 1920s, where it cost only $2 to $4 a vial. I decided on this topic because I myself, as a diabetic, wanted to know who is behind the rise. I have worked to unveil the truths, to inform the public, expose the corrupt actions involved in insulin pricing, and advocate for us diabetics that insulin is not a business, but a lifeline. The rise in insulin is due to three contributors: insulin manufacturers, pharmacy benefit managers, and lack of reform from policymakers. Ultimately, these actions have led to diabetics' rationing of insulin, resulting in medical problems and psychological turmoil. The first contributor in the rise of insulin costs is the insulin manufacturers. There are three main insulin manufacturers in the US: Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi. The issue is that there are only three manufacturers. These companies hold an immense amount of power in the market, and since they have limited competition, make extreme profit. Because of the autonomy they have, manufacturers can leverage for higher list prices and make it difficult for generic brands of insulin to compete. Generic brands of insulin, better known as biosimilars, are meant to drive down insulin prices and compete with the manufacturers. Unfortunately, the three manufacturers are such a dominant force that these generic brands of insulin don't make a dent in the market. This structure and control that manufacturers have impact diabetics financially, and the worst part is there's nothing we can do to stop them. The lack of transparency allows them to rise insulin prices without proper justification. This lack of transparency is further matched with the process of shadow pricing, where the manufacturers will rise insulin costs within days just to match each other and maintain high profits. What's even more shocking is it takes just around $2 to produce a bottle of insulin, while it is sold for upwards of 70 to 100 times more. These practices leave diabetics in a loop of unexplainably paying high costs for a drug that has been around for 100 years, where the value is nowhere near. The next contributor in the rise of insulin pricing are the pharmacy benefit managers, better known as PBMs. This is a step in the process that most people, even diabetics, would not be aware of. A PBM's job is to secure rebates from insulin manufacturers on behalf of the insurance companies. The overall goal of this is to lower the cost of insulin for patients. A rebate is basically a discount that manufacturers pay back to the PBMs. In theory, that this money should help reduce what patients pay at the pharmacy counter. However, this rarely happens. Instead of using these rebates to lower costs, PBMs keep a portion of the rebate money, which encourages the PBMs to prefer drugs with higher list prices, as they will get to keep more. Because higher list prices lead to larger rebates, PBMs tend to work hand in hand with the manufacturer. As we know, manufacturers have enough money to pay the PBMs larger sums, which prefer their products and lead to higher list prices. The PBMs make profit, the manufacturer's products are preferred at high cost, and in turn, the only people that hurt in this cycle are the diabetics. This is the process that is supposed to help, not hurt. The last contributor to the rising cost of insulin are the policymakers. To clarify, it's a matter of what the policymakers have failed to do or implement correctly. In 2022, the Insulin Reduction Act was passed in hopes of helping to relieve financial strain for diabetics paying for insulin. In theory, policymakers are implementing a strategy that is useful, but what is left out about this act is that it does not apply to all. In a video from NBC News, they explain this problem.
Prices, the life-saving medication needed by more than 7 million Americans currently has a $35 cost cap for people with Medicare only. So the Inflation Reduction Act does not cap insulin costs for people with private insurance, leaving millions of families struggling to pay for insulin.
Policymakers need to focus on targeting where the rise is starting from, the PBMs and manufacturers, instead of placing a band-aid over the cost. As policymakers face the struggles at hand, they must focus on reforming the system as there are no proper rules and regulations in place to control pricing, which is why it has gone so out of hand. Also, policymakers must focus on supporting the implementation of generic biosimilars in the market to lower cost, a viable solution to all. A report from Business Insider states,
The US does not regulate prices. So that's part of the answer. Insulin's expensive because it can be. There's no limit to how high the price can rise.
the $35 monthly cap may be a start, but policymakers have larger goals to focus on. Now that these goals have been pointed out, it's crucial that action is taken. We are now aware of why insulin prices are so high. Identifying the rise is one step, but in the end, the prices affect one group and one group only: diabetics. The financial strain has resulted in medical challenges and psychological turmoil in securing insulin. The unfortunate truth is that rationing of insulin is a serious consequence of pricing, one that can lead to a tragic ending. For those like Alex Smith, who was only 26 and just off his mother's insurance, working full-time to pay for insulin, he rationed insulin for 4 days and passed away, one day before payday. Rationing of insulin can lead to a complication called diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA, which is a life-threatening complication that happens to the body when there is not enough insulin. As someone who has experienced DKA once, I can say that this is a serious matter. Although it may not have been due to insulin pricing, my body shut down after a few mere hours without enough insulin, resulting in severe sickness, fatigue, and nausea. A diabetic should never be forced over a day without insulin, and for Alex, he went 4. What businesses view as a money-making scheme results in type 1 diabetics' bodies physically shutting down, and for those who do secure insulin, their bodies may shut down in other ways. The psychological distress is enough for diabetics as it is. Diabetics are 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from depression and have to make unnecessary sacrifices for their life-saving medication. The constant question of, will I be able to afford insulin, leads diabetics to face severe anxiety and left in a constant state of fear. To recap it all, the contributors to the rise in costs begin with the manufacturers, who set high drug prices due to limited competition and lack of reinforcement. The PBMs, who selfishly influence pricing through rebates, and the policymakers, whose regulations or lack thereof fail to address the market's problems at hand. Just like me here, on my diagnosis date in Yale New Haven Hospital, no child, parent, teacher, grandparent, or anyone else in the diabetic community should have to face the medical and psychological challenges resulting from the corrupt practices of manufacturers, PBMs, and policymakers. As a united front with our voices, we can see change, calling out the system for their flaws and pushing for real reform that works for all diabetics, not against us.